We'll be moving on to another presentation by Dr. Mary Lusk of the University of Florida Gulf Coast Research and Education Center. This will be on steps to reducing nutrients to reduce red tide. The purpose of this is to provide an overview of current and ongoing research at the UF Urban Soil and Water Quality Lab focused on watershed drivers that control the timing, magnitude, variability, and impact of nutrient transport in urban landscapes. The CCMP connection is all water quality improvement priority actions. Go ahead, Dr. Lusk.
Hey, thank you, and thanks for letting me be here today and present your meeting today. I appreciate this opportunity. So yes, I am at the University of Florida's Gulf Coast Research and Education Center, which is in Hillsborough County. So I'm here on this side of the state and do a lot of research in Southwest Florida, and particularly as it relates to water quality in our estuaries along the southwest coast of Florida, such as Tampa Bay Estuary and Sarasota and Charlotte Harbor Estuary. So yes, and I put some animations in my slides, so there's going to be a lot of like advancing. So when you advance to my next slide, can you go ahead, please? And there you go. You took the animations out. You're perfect. So I focus a lot of my work on trying to identify sources of nutrients that can fuel water quality impairments in our waters. And I particularly look at urban sources of nutrients. So of course, nutrients can also be sourced from agricultural environments, but I focus on the urban world. And this slide represents some pictures that I took while walking around my urban neighborhood in the Tampa Bay area not too long ago. And within a matter of about 10 minutes, I took all of these pictures. And they just show some examples of how nutrients can be mobilized and where they can come from in our urban environments. And I'll start sort of up there in the top left-hand corner, you see the downspout that's connected to the driveway. And how can this be a source of nutrient mobilization? Well, we're just taking nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus that may be in the rainwater or it may be on the roof of that house, but we're just channeling them right to the impervious surface of that driveway, which is then connected to the sidewalks in the streets and to the stormwater infrastructure in the neighborhood. So it's just taking nutrients and just making a channel for them, a direct path for them to go right to our stormwater network. Underneath that is a picture of a sprinkler that's irrigating a lawn. And you see on the sidewalk there, the little wet place on the sidewalk where that sprinkler is watering the sidewalk a little bit. And I have a colleague in Pasco County, University of Florida Extension, who likes to say, just wet your plants. In other words, make sure that you're only watering the grass and not the streets and the sidewalks. And how can that be a source of nutrient mobilization for our urban environments? Well, in this case, we're using reclaimed water, and that reclaimed water can have elevated levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in it. And if we're not irrigating wisely, then again, we're sending those nutrients right into the stormwater network. And we need to use reclaimed water in Florida. Absolutely, we should irrigate with that water to help us offset potable water usage. But we need to do so wisely and with the understanding that that water can have nutrients in it. And so we need to fine tune and maintain those sprinkler heads so we're not irrigating the streets and the sidewalks. In the middle of the screen is a picture of leaf litter and grass clippings and the stormwater drain. Absolutely, those can be a source of nutrients and need to be removed and understood that that material, if it's left there in the stormwater drain, it's just leaching nitrogen and phosphorus into the stormwater. I have a study that we are getting ready to put together and publish here in the next few months, where we looked at some of that material over an entire year. We let it sit in the stormwater drain for a year, and we went in every couple of weeks and analyzed it. For an entire year, it leached nitrogen and phosphorus into the stormwater, and probably even longer than that. On the right-hand side on the top, you see some bare soil. Those two pictures were taken side by side from each other in the environment. We have a bare soil lawn, and then that soil that you see is in the stormwater gutter in the neighborhood. And so soil is just eroding right from that bare dirt lawn into the street. You know what? I'm more afraid of that scenario than I am a bright green lawn that's been fertilized because I know the nutrients that are in that soil. Soil has a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in it. It's eroding from that bare lawn and just going right down into the stormwater gutter, carrying that nitrogen and phosphorus with it. So anytime I see a lawn that looks like that, I just shudder. We need to keep vegetation on those surfaces because their exposed soil can be a source of nutrient mobilization. Use that photo-friendly landscaping principle of right plant, right place. In this case, it's an older neighborhood with a lot of trees, so there's a lot of shade. So it's hard to keep a healthy stand of turf. Well, it doesn't have to be turf, but there are plants that we can put there that are shade tolerant that will prevent this scenario from happening. Underneath that is a picture of a very compacted urban soil. Compacted urban soils can also be a big problem because they don't allow water infiltration. The water just runs off the surface of these soils. So anything that's on the surface of that soil, like pet waste or some fertilizers that have been applied or any other pollutant in the environment, because water can't infiltrate and filter through the soil because it's compacted, it will just run off and become a source of stormwater pollution. So a good solution for that is incorporate mulch and compost into our urban soils during the construction process. Because you think about it, imagine you've got a homeowner with a compacted urban lawn, and they're going to try over and over and over again to get grass to grow on that compacted soil. Because the soil is so compacted, the lawn's not going to look very good, the grass isn't going to grow very well. What's the homeowner most likely to do? They're most likely to think, well, maybe it just needs some fertilizer, and we go out there and dump some fertilizer on it. All the fertilizer in the world will not take care of that problem. We need to get that soil so it's tilled up and looser and finer so that water can infiltrate and nutrients can be made available to the plant. And then finally, underneath there, my last picture is a picture of a pet waste station. Of course, pet waste can be a source of nutrient pollution to stormwater runoff in our urban environments. And I have some data that I'll show in just a minute that indicates just how much so that can be the case. All right, next slide. So one of the tools that I use to learn the source of nitrogen in urban stormwater is a tool called isotopic tracking or isotope source tracking. And I have just one quick slide on isotopes. I promise this is my only chemistry intensive slide in my presentation. I just want you to know how we use this tool and why we find it to be reasonably good tool for inferring sources of nutrients in urban stormwater. So what are isotopes? So remember back in your chemistry class, they are atoms of the same element with different numbers of neutrons. So if two atoms have the same number of protons, they are always the same atom. So for example, nitrogen has 7 protons, always, no matter what. But it can have a different number of neutrons depending on which isotope it is. And because of that, we can sometimes have nitrogen with a mass of 14, or maybe nitrogen with a mass of 15 because it's got 1 extra neutron in it. Likewise, oxygen can be oxygen 16, or it can be 17 with 1 extra neutron, or 18 with 2 extra neutrons. So this creates a situation where you can have atoms of the same element with slightly different masses. So some will be a little bit lighter and some will be a little bit heavier. Next slide, please. So because we can have these atoms of the same element with slightly different masses, we can have a process called isotopic fractionation. This is where the microorganisms that will use those atoms in the environment preferentially use the lighter atoms and leave the heavier ones behind. And we've learned through years of research and study that different processes in the environment that use nitrogen will leave a different isotopic signature of heavy to light atoms. And we can analyze an environmental sample, such as stormwater runoff or water from a stream or a creek or whatever the case may be, and look at the ratio of light to heavy atoms of nitrogen or oxygen in a sample and make some inferences about where it comes from. And I put a graph there on the right side of the screen that shows how we might use this. So I'll take an environmental sample, in this case, stormwater runoff, and I'll analyze it for that isotopic signature of nitrogen and oxygen in the nitrate, which is NO3, in that runoff. And I'll plot where those signatures fall on this graph. And you can see on this graph then what most likely sources of that nitrate are. So if it's up there in the top in that blue area, it's most likely coming from the atmosphere, from precipitation, rainfall. If it's down in the bottom in that red zone, it's most likely coming from manure or septic system waste, pet waste, those types of materials. And so you can see some potential sources there. So we just take environmental samples, analyze them for that isotopic signature, plot them on a graph like this to see where they fall. And it gives us a lot of information about where that nitrate is coming from. So let me show you some examples of some research that's done this in the Southwest Florida area, and that's next slide. Okay, so this study was done in Hillsborough and Manatee counties in residential neighborhoods. These would be very similar, not completely similar, to neighborhoods in the Charlotte Harbor area. This study was done by collecting stormwater runoff in 6 different neighborhoods and analyzing it for the isotopic signatures, just like I just mentioned to you. And we see the plots for that on the right side of the screen there. And you'll see a lot of those samples were plotting for atmospheric deposition nitrate, a lot of nitrate in those samples coming just from precipitation itself. And then we have some down there in the green area, from ammonia and nitrate fertilizers, a little bit from soil in the yellow plots, and a few that were in the manure and septic system, which in this neighborhood is most likely pet waste. Take-home message from this one, and this is what's summarized down below in the bottom of the slide. More than 50% of the nitrate nitrogen in these samples in these residential communities in Hillsborough and Manatee is just from atmospheric deposition, from rainfall itself. With the next most important sources being ammonia and nitrate fertilizers, and then soil and organic matter in those samples. What we do about nitrate is just in the rain. Well, the answer is really we need to slow runoff. We need to capture that runoff, or capture that water, capture that rainfall before it becomes runoff. So anything that we can do in our urban environments to promote infiltration of that rainfall instead of it running off and carrying nutrients with it, that's what we need to focus on. So our green infrastructure methods that will put any or as much pervious vegetative surface into our landscapes as possible. That's always going to be preferential to hard surfaces that are just going to channel that rainfall right to a receiving water body. Okay, next slide. This is a similar study. This was done in an Indian River lagoon, but again, very similar to communities that I've seen in Charlotte Harbor. This was a waterfront community, just like a lot of the communities that I've seen in Charlotte County. Waterfront homes. You've got your home in the backyard is backed up right to a lagoon or to a water body. And we went into this community and sampled water right after it left the lawn, but right before it went into the canal on the backside of the lawns, and analyzed that as well for nitrate, nitrogen, and did this isotopic analysis. All of the points are samples and where they fell. The numbers that you see there on that legend, those were just the number, it was just the lawns, and lawn number 1, lawn number 2, and so forth, all the way to lawn number 10. Again, some of them falling in the atmospheric deposition zone. We got a lot this time in the ammonia fertilizer and soil zone. We also have quite a few in that pet waste zone. You'll see over there, lawn, I think it's lawn number 4. All those purple squares were lawn number 4. Lawn number 4 was someone who used Florida-friendly landscaping principles. They did not apply fertilizers to their lawn. They were very happy to say that they did not apply fertilizers to their lawn. They had a beautiful black Labrador retriever that ran free in the backyard. And guess what? Beautiful black Labrador retriever left a lot of nitrate nitrogen in that backyard. And we could see that definitely when we analyzed the runoff from that lawn, and we saw very high levels of nitrate being sourced from cutways. Take home message there is just pick that material up. That's an easy fix that can definitely be used to, in this case, would have prevented that mobilization of nitrate from the lawn into the adjacent land body. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is another study that took place also in Hillsborough County, looking at total nitrogen in urban residential stormwater. On the left there, this is just a diagram of the parcels in the neighborhoods, all the green areas where there's an individual homeowner's parcel. Little blue dots are stormwater drains in the streets, and there's a blue stormwater pond there on the left-hand side. So all of the stormwater in that neighborhood is being channeled to that pond. And this study, we collected stormwater right before it entered the pond. So everything that we were collecting right before it entered that pond would be a compilation of all of the stormwater from the homes in that diagram that you see. And I will show the data on the next slide, please. All right, so in this data, we're looking at a wet season, so June to end of September. Blue lines on the top are rainfall coming down, so that's all the storms throughout the rain season and the depth of volume of rain, depth of rainfall that came down. Pink lines on the bottom going up represent total nitrogen concentrations in that stormwater runoff across the wet season. Again, this is total nitrogen, so it includes a sum of nitrate, ammonia, dissolved organic nitrogen, and particulate organic nitrogen. You'll see that it was highest June to July, even though rainfall was pretty consistent throughout the entire wet season. And that early, relatively high concentration of total nitrogen in the runoff is what we call a seasonal first flush. When you think about it, it makes sense that we've got the dry season and there's all this material accumulating on the streets and the sidewalks. And then the rainy season starts and it starts flushing all of that stuff through our stormwater network. And so that's why we see that relatively higher peak of total nitrogen very early in the season. When we looked closer at that and did isotopic analysis to try to pinpoint, most likely where that first flush was coming from, it's the picture that you see there in the middle. It was almost entirely from oak leaf litter and grass clippings. And again, that makes a lot of sense. This material, it sits on the streets. Oak leaves in our part of the state oak trees drop their leaves like February, March every year, and it just sits there until the rainy season starts, and it's flushed through our stormwater with that big peak that we see there in total nitrogen. Okay, next slide. This is from the same study. This took total nitrogen and just broke it down into forms. So at the very bottom, the green one is ammonia nitrogen. Blue on top of that is nitrate nitrogen. Dark gray is dissolved organic nitrogen, and light gray is particulate organic nitrogen. And the first bar is the whole season, and then the next bar, as we separated that out by month. Just take home message of this is that there's a lot of organic nitrogen in that stormwater. And we see this repeatedly all over our stormwater studies that we do in Southwest Florida and across the state, really. 50 to 80% of the nitrogen that we're seeing in our stormwater from urban environments is typically organic nitrogen. And we've already heard from other speakers today that organic nitrogen can definitely be Karenia brevis. It is a form of nitrogen that K. brevis will use. So just keep that in mind. We do have a lot of this dissolved organic nitrogen and particulate organic nitrogen in our stormwater in this part of Florida. Most likely that is coming from the atmosphere or from those vegetation materials like I just showed you, the leaf litter and the grass clippings. Okay, next slide. One of the things that I also look at in my research is reclaimed water. Reclaimed water being former domestic wastewater that has been treated, but it can again have high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in it. This study was done in California, and I'm in the process right now of doing a similar study on the east coast of Florida, and would love to do one on the west coast of Florida if anybody would like to talk to me more about that. But what I want to point out here is in this study, this was done in a residential community, and the blue line is total nitrogen. Let's focus just on that. And you notice that there are definite ups and downs in those peaks. It's pretty cyclical, up and down, up and down. Well, it's highest at times of the day when the community is irrigating common spaces with reclaimed water. It's lowest at the time of day when individual homeowners are irrigating their lawns with potable water. So you're seeing the contrast here between irrigation with reclaimed water and potable water. Total nitrogen in that runoff being really high when the reclaimed water is being used, but lower when the potable water is being used. And again, again and again, I tell the message, we have got to use that reclaimed water in Florida to offset our pumping of groundwater for things like lawn irrigation. But we really need to understand the nutrient loads that can be in that water and have management practices that will address that. And part of the work that I do at the University of Florida is an extension program. I have a 70% research, 30% extension. My extension program focuses on homeowner education of best management practices for using reclaimed water so that we keep it off the streets and sidewalks and we just water the plants, because sidewalks don't grow, right? You don't need to be irrigating and adding nitrogen and phosphorus to the streets and sidewalks. All right, next slide. This study is looking at stormwater runoff right before it goes into a pond again. So we're collecting it underneath that drain right before it goes into a pond in a residential community. I've got some data underneath there from this study. We're looking at TDN, which is total dissolved nitrogen, DIN, dissolved inorganic nitrogen, and DON, dissolved organic nitrogen. So what I want you to focus on here is the runoff is, the one on the left is right before it goes into the pond. The one on the right is when it comes out of the pond. So we hope that water that comes out of the pond has a lot less nutrients in it than water that went into the pond, right? Because that means our stormwater pond is cleaning our stormwater, right? Time and again, we see evidence that these ponds are not removing nitrogen and phosphorus. And here's just one example. I can send you this publication if anyone's interested. Let's focus on total dissolved nitrogen in the runoff and total dissolved nitrogen on the right that's coming out of the pond. We went from 1.5 to 2 milligrams per liter. It's higher when it goes out of the pond than when that runoff went in the pond. How can that be? Well, because of the nitrogen cycle. And if we had an hour, I would happily talk to you about all the processes that are going on there. But in that pond, there's a lot of material that settles to the bottom. Again, there's oak leaves, there's grass clippings, that eroded soil, and they have nitrogen in them. And over time, that nitrogen is released into the water column. So that it is very possible to have more nitrogen coming out of that pond at this point in time than you had going into it. Again, these ponds are doing very little for us in terms of nitrogen removal. A little bit better in terms of phosphorus removal, but nitrogen, we're just not cutting it. Also, underneath each of those pictures, I have a little sentence that talks about bioavailable. In this study, we also took the runoff and the pond outflow water and did the bioassay to see how microorganisms were able to use the organic nitrogen. In the runoff, about 10% of it was used, but in the pond outflow, that number went up to 40%. So again, this pond is not only a net exporter of nitrogen, it is a net exporter of bioavailable organic nitrogen. Again, because of nitrogen cycling processes that are going on in that pond, just processes that take it, nitrogen that's initially bound in, say, plant material and becomes released to the water column. So these ponds may offer very little downstream protection, particularly for nitrogen mobilization. Okay, next slide. So I've got a couple of slides here of just management implications of some of the research that we've done and the things that I've just talked about. First of all, multiple sources of nutrients in our urban environments, atmospheric, pet waste, soils, all of that. Implication of this, really important to prevent soil erosion, really important to implement street sweeping and pet waste management, and green infrastructure to reduce runoff and capture that rainfall before it becomes runoff. We've also replaced nitrogen forms in context with each other with DON or dissolved organic nitrogen often being a prominent source of nitrogen in a form of nitrogen in our urban runoff in this part of the state. So that's the one that we really need to look at for focusing our management practices on. Identifying sources of nitrate in local runoff is atmosphere, organic matter, and fertilizers. So we need more than just fertilizer bans. I don't argue with it. There's ordinances, do important things for urban nutrient management for us, but we need to not look at them as a solution to everything, because there are other things as well that we need to look at, such as, again, atmospheric deposition and grass clippings and leaf litter, that sort of stuff. Next slide. That seasonal first flush, remember when we had that high peak of total nitrogen early in the season. This tells us that there are critical moments in time for nitrogen removal, maybe before the onset of a wet season every year would be a really good time to get out there and think about doing some street sweeping and removing those materials from the street. Identify sources of particulate organic nitrogen as leaf litter and grass clippings. Again, support best management practices and good housekeeping in our residential communities. Support practices that will remove that material as much as possible. Number 3, reclaimed water is a potential nutrient source. And again, the answer to that is education for our homeowners and those folks that are using that material. And then finally, number 4, stormwater ponds is net exporters of bioavailable dissolved. And just simply put, we need a lot more future research on how to better design our ponds and other stormwater control measures to improve nutrient removal from those ponds. And that's something that my lab is working on right now. Okay, next slide. So to wrap it up, this is my last slide. I do want to let you know about our program. If you're not familiar with it, it is called the Healthy Ponds Certification Program, an extension program. And with some colleagues of mine at the University of Florida, we're running this program. It is an 8-week online education program for landscaping professionals, HOA managers, city and county personnel, those types of workers, to learn everything you ever wanted to know about stormwater ponds and how they work and how we can optimize them for greater nutrient removal to protect downstream water bodies. It's an excellent course. It culminates at the end of the 8 weeks with a field day on-site at a pond. We go through methods for collecting pond water samples and analyzing them, and as well as management practices for improving nutrient removal in ponds. So if you're interested in that, please shoot me an email and I can get you information on the next time that we'll be conducting that course locally. And then just some ongoing research in my lab, so you're aware of it. We're looking at the effects of pond plantings on nutrient uptakes. And so, often we have these ponds in residential communities and it's just grass, water, right? So we're looking at what happens when we plant a buffer of littoral shelf vegetative plantings around those ponds. Will that help improve nutrient uptakes? We're also looking at the role of atmospheric deposition, more and more on nitrogen and phosphorus in stormwater, and the specific utilization by K-Brothers. We have a study right now. We are incubating that rainfall and stormwater with K-Brothers specifically, and looking at K-Brothers' response to that. That is in collaboration with Cynthia Heil at Moat and my PhD student Amanda Morgan. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we are continuing to research on the reclaimed water and nutrients in that water and how it can be mobilized and used as well. So that is me. So last slide, next one, please. So my email address is there. Feel free to reach out at any time if you have questions. Or if you're interested in any of this research or seeing similar research in your community, we would love to talk. We're always looking for people to collaborate with and to do research with. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Luss. That was a really great presentation. A lot of information there on some nutrient sources we may not all suspect are as contributing as much as they are.